Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm just going to give folks another minute or two to trickle in here. Appreciate everybody joining us on what I hope for you all is also a rainy morning. Thank goodness we're finally getting some precipitation. We do have a fairly full agenda this morning, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute. All right, well, welcome everybody to our September quarterly meeting. I hope you all had a great summer. I know that many of you have been busy tackling climate change issues, and I want to thank you all for your ongoing efforts since the last time we met. Last time we met in June, our state legislature was still in session. We were watching closely as changes were unfolding in the federal government on climate policy, programming, and staffing. And at that time, there were still a lot of unknowns, and there still are. But we are beginning to get a clearer picture of what we're going to see coming on the federal landscape and how things have changed since we released our 2024 update to Maine Won't Wait. So for today, we're going to kick things off with some highlights from the last legislative session. A number of the bills that were enacted reflected recommendations from Maine Won't Wait, and they're a good reminder that Maine is still prioritizing climate action. We're going to review some of the changes that have happened at the federal level and what they mean for our work here in Maine. Our Science and Technical Subcommittee co-chairs, Susie Arnold and Ivan Fernandez, will share what they're seeing when it comes to the loss of science assets and capacity. And Amanda Beal, Dan Burgess, and Ann Fuchs will share how federal changes are affecting their departments and what they're doing to continue moving forward to implement Maine Won't Wait. There are certainly some new headwinds, but we do have positive developments here in Maine. We're excited to have Samantha Horn and Dan Burgess share the latest on the Maine Office of Community Affairs and the new Department of Energy Resources. And then lastly, we'll conclude this morning with some updates on the Green Schools Network, new communication tools, our annual progress report, and what our next steps are going to look like in December and in 2026. But before we get into those updates, I do want to introduce a couple of new members to the Climate Council. Luke Dyer, thank you for joining us this morning. Luke is the town manager of Van Buren and is representing municipal government on the council. He's a former law enforcement professional with more than 30 years of service, and he's now focused on fostering sustainable growth in his community through projects like the Van Buren Community Garden, small business incubator initiatives, and environmentally conscious downtown development. We're also excited to welcome Samantha Pease, who will be replacing Todd Bullen as Hannaford's representative on the council. Samantha is Hannaford's Health and Sustainability Lead. She's a certified zero waste advisor and a Maine Maritime graduate who's been helping Ahold Delhaize, which is the parent company of Hannaford, meet their sustainability goals for over a decade. So both Luke and Samantha will be great additions to the council. And then in particular, I am pleased to introduce Hillary Landfried, who many of you have probably heard from at this point. You'll be receiving her emails. She is the new Maine Climate Council coordinator working for the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. Prior to joining GOPIF, Hillary led the development of over $1.7 billion in investments in food security, climate resilience, and sustainable agriculture at USAID and USDA. She managed market entry and field trials in emerging markets for clean energy technologies, and was on the founding team of a nonprofit focused on global policy innovation. So we're super excited to have Hillary join the team at GOPIF and to be supporting all of us with the Climate Council. And I want to thank all of you who are joining us today for bringing all of your talents and experience to the council. This is a time when we know that the work that we're doing at the state level is more important than ever, and we really appreciate all of your contributions to that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Curran.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all. I'm going to start with some highlights from the last legislative session. This session was an important one for our work, and by one count, there were more than 85 bills that were associated with strengthening Maine won't wait and implementing our climate priorities in some way. So that's too many highlights to highlight this morning, but I want to go through just a few to call your attention to. First, I want to highlight LD1. Governor Mills signed LD1 into law with overwhelming bipartisan support. This is a bill that she introduced, which establishes the State Resilience Office and strengthens community preparedness and resiliency to extreme weather events. LD1 was modeled on the recommendations of the Rebuilding and Resilience Commission and builds on the $60 million that the governor proposed and the legislature approved in 2024 to support the recovery and rebuilding of Maine communities and businesses following the severe storms of December 2023 and January 2024. The single largest investment in storm recovery by any administration in Maine history. LD1 invests $39 million in resilience measures across 3 areas using surplus funds from the Maine Bureau of Insurance and federal funds. First, a home resilience program to help homeowners to strengthen their roofs or flood-proof their basements in their primary residence to strengthen against severe weather damage and reduce insurance losses. And that program will be tiered to provide more support to lower income households. Second, LD1 enhanced hazard mitigation resources to leverage federal disaster funds and invest in statewide emergency communication systems. And finally, it established the new State Resilience Office, including a Flood Ready Maine initiative to provide improved floodplain models, updated maps, and building regional capacity for floodplain management. Another really significant highlight from this session is LD 1270, which created the new Maine Department of Energy Resources, which is a new cabinet level department focused on the complex energy challenges our state faces, such as affordability, grid reliability, and aging infrastructure. Since its inception at the start of Governor Mills' administration, the Governor's Energy Office has led substantive progress in securing clean, affordable energy for Maine. The office has won more than $200 million in federal funding to support grid resilience and innovation, energy efficiency, and workforce development. And later in the meeting, we'll hear from Acting Commissioner Dan Burgess about how the creation of the new department will provide new opportunities and authorities to advance strategies that reduce energy costs and strengthen reliability. Both of these significant administration priorities were budget neutral, demonstrating that the Mills administration is finding ways to advance resilience and energy security at no additional cost to taxpayers. Another important update is the strengthened commitment to procuring and deploying clean, affordable energy. LD 1868 amends the state goals for electricity from renewable resources. The bill mandates that by 2040, 90% of electricity will come from renewable resources and 10% will come from clean resources. That bill also gives additional authority to the Public Utilities Commission to coordinate with other states to procure transmission capacity, capacity resources, energy, renewable energy tax credits, or clean energy credits. It also establishes a regular schedule of competitive procurements for renewable and clean energy resources. LD 1967 requires the Department of Energy Resources and GOPIF in consultation with the Efficiency Maine Trust, the Maine State Housing Authority, and the Maine Office of Community Affairs to design a pilot program for home energy navigation and coaching to provide guidance on energy efficiency, clean energy investments, and financial considerations to homeowners and renters. This type of program was a key recommendation in the 2024 update to Maine Won't Wait, and it's focused to ensure that the benefits of climate programs reach diverse populations of Maine people, especially low-income households. Green schools are also a key recommendation in our updated climate plan, and LD 1543 officially established the Maine Green Schools Network within the Department of Education to support environmental education and climate initiatives in public schools. And we'll hear from Paige Nichols and Glenn Cummings later in the program from the Department of Education. They'll share more next steps about the Green Schools program. The legislature moved land use and planning grants and technical assistance programs to the Maine Office of Community Affairs as part of the biennial budget last spring. improving the agency's ability to serve as a one-stop shop for municipalities. And Samantha Horn is going to join us later to share more about how MOCA is making climate action more accessible to communities later in the meeting. The legislature also established a Lead by Example program within the Bureau of General Services and a revolving grant program for renewable energy and building efficiency projects at state agencies. Additionally, the legislature allocated funding for the operation and maintenance of 5 additional stream gauges, critical tools that help Maine better monitor water movement and prepare for flood events. There were a few budget items that were carried over that we'll be keeping a close eye on in the next session. These include a resilience bond, new funding for the Land for Maine's Future program, and a school energy saving revolving loan fund. And last but not least, in LD 1138, we continued progress on our appliance standards. There are so many more updates to highlight than the ones that I've covered, but luckily when we hear from the panel later in the session, we'll hear a little bit more about some additional legislation that's helping us make great progress on Maine Won't Wait. Now I'd like to turn a little bit to some of the federal updates. As Melanie was mentioning, quite a bit has changed since the start of the year. And so I want to highlight just a few of the major policy updates and then turn it over to the co-chairs of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and to our panel of agency leaders for a deeper dive into how federal changes are impacting the implementation of Maine Won't Wait strategies. In July, President Trump signed into law H.R. 1, the 2025 Budget Reconciliation Bill. There is a lot in that bill, but for our purposes here, it's important to know that H.R. 1 accelerates the phase out of the Inflation Reduction Act's energy tax credits, shortens the deadlines for project credit qualification, particularly for solar and wind, and increases domestic purchase requirements. All of this adds up to a less favorable landscape for renewable energy and energy transition than where we were just a year ago. The IRA federal tax credits for installing solar, buying an electric car, or upgrading homes with cleaner, more affordable energy are still available to Mainers, but many are phasing out quickly. And these changes are going to influence how we can invest in energy efficiency and new generation in Maine and across New England. And they have real implications for electricity rates as demand continues to grow. Across the board, Mainers are feeling the squeeze on their household budgets from rising costs affecting every state. It's important to note that H.R. 1 has far-reaching negative implications for the well-being of Mainers. Our low-income residents will face among the steepest challenges. In addition to making energy less affordable, H.R. 1 will significantly impact Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which helps about 175,000 Mainers afford food every month. In this moment, as we continue to pursue climate action, it is more important than ever to consider the Maine people who are struggling to make ends meet. Melanie, I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple more updates.
Thanks, Sarah. Wanted to mention to folks another important federal update is the U.S. EPA Environmental Protection Agency's proposal to rescind its 2009 endangerment finding that greenhouse gases pose a threat to public health and welfare. Back in 2009, that finding was a landmark decision, and it established the scientific basis for regulating greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. So this is a big one for us, potentially, in terms of some pretty broad regulatory impacts. EPA's current proposal would reverse that finding, and it would rescind the federal standards for greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. In response, Governor Mills released a strong statement condemning the proposal and underscoring her administration's continued commitment to protect the health of Maine people, our clean air and water, and their benefits to our economy. The Maine Department of Environmental Protection and the Maine Attorney General's Office have submitted formal comments to EPA's docket, and we are going to be keeping a close eye on any developments related to that. Then on top of that, just last week, EPA also proposed a rollback of the congressionally mandated greenhouse gas reporting program, which would waive all reporting requirements for greenhouse gas emissions from licensed facilities until 2034. For context, the greenhouse gas reporting program administered by the EPA has been capturing up to 95% of greenhouse gas emissions from over 8,000 facilities nationwide. Here in Maine, we do have a comparable requirement that's been in place in state law since 2003. So it's not going to change the reporting requirements here in Maine for Maine's facilities. But by EPA rolling back those reporting requirements, it means that we're going to be looking at a patchwork of reporting requirements across the country, and it's going to undermine the quality of the national US greenhouse gas inventory that we've been using to track our progress. Public comments are due on that proposal November 3rd, and so we'll be keeping an eye on that and submitting comments on that as well. Sarah mentioned, now I think we want to turn things over to our Science and Technical Subcommittee co-chairs, Drs. Arnold and Fernandez. And they'll be giving us some insights that they gleaned from an informal survey they did of their subcommittee members. And we'll be highlighting what they're seeing regarding science assets that have been eliminated or are at risk. So Susie and Ivan, take it away.
Now that I'm unmuted, good morning and thank you, Melanie. We appreciate the opportunity to have a few moments on the agenda this morning. As Commissioner said, Susie Arnold from the Island Institute and myself from the University of Maine serve as co-chairs of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of the Maine Climate Council. We also are the science members of the Maine Climate Council itself. And then we wanted to share a few thoughts around science assets at risk. This is we call it a reflection, some comments from the both of us as a consequence of discussions with the membership of the committee and the polling that Melanie referred to, as well as the subsequent discussions that we've had since then. Just as a reminder, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee is composed of roughly around 45 scientists, almost all of them in Maine with international reputations, but with a deep commitment to Maine and very likely are the world's experts in how science it applies to Maine. Next slide, please. So as Susie and I began to reflect on the work to be done in the coming year last spring for the Science and Technical Subcommittee, we couldn't help but be mindful of the dramatic changes taking place in what I'll call the landscape of science in the United States over the last 10 months or so. Could you click it again? We've all seen headlines in periodicals and news magazines and other media, as well as social media, about some of the pretty dramatic decisions and variation in commitment to the landscape of science here in the United States. Our message here this morning is not about the politics of that, but it is the reality that as we sit down to determine what the task in front of us is, the changes that have taken place to these science assets across the country, including the impacts here on Maine, inform the work that needs to be done going forward. And it's really how we think about those changes in the work of the STS and the work of the Council that we wanted to share as a message, as a call for thought and dialogue about the implications for this going forward. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, it has responsibilities as laid out in statute to monitor climate change impacts in Maine and the relevant climate science advances. By that, we're talking about understanding what science is out there that informs the work that we do here in Maine, and the development of course, Maine Won't Wait. One of the other areas of work that the STS does and has been doing is to highlight information needs, critical scientific data and monitoring gaps that may exist that we would highlight in order to move towards a continued and strengthening science background for the climate policy work going on in Maine. Next slide, please. And I suspect and hope many of you recall we have been doing that for the last 5 years or so. We issued a pretty extensive report, Scientific Assessment of Climate Change and Its Effects in Maine, in 2020 in support of the development of the original Maine Won't Wait. In 2021, we released a short update, and then last year in 2024, we released another relatively extensive science assessment, not starting from ground zero, but building on the 2020 assessment to support the development of Maine Won't Wait, the Maine Won't Wait update, Maine Won't Wait version 2. And we plan to do a similar short update in 2026, probably to be released in the first half of the year to inform the ongoing work that's taking place in the state of Maine. It's the reality that in that effort, as we look at what are the scientific information needs for the state, it's a very different landscape than we've been working under since we started to do this work. It's no longer business as usual in determining what is out there that we will build on, particularly the resources that are supported through the federal government. Next slide, please. So before I turn it over to Susie, just high level, what's our message here today? Well, it might be boiled down to 2 points. One is changes and the pace of change in federal support for science calls for continued tracking and analysis of the status of science assets. And by science assets, we're talking about funding for research that's taking place here in Maine, as well as elsewhere that informs Maine, scientists within the federal government that have been our partners, as well as independent investigators that doing research that informs the work that we do here in Maine, that have been reduced. Monitoring of various aspects of environmental change that is critical to understanding the nature of change, and that we increasingly are using these kinds of data to inform management across all sorts of sectors. And data that it comes from that monitoring, but also the long-term and historical data that the United States has been notorious for the availability of those kinds of data sets and access essentially to all Americans up till now for that data availability. As those assets change, how do we think about the work that needs to be done here in the state of Maine? And so that information is important to prioritize these science assets that may be lost or diminished. And then with that prioritization, be able to explore how to support the most critical science assets for the continued science-informed implementation of Maine Won't Wait, for which I think we all know that Maine has been recognized as a leader. So the concern here is for the change in the fabric of that science landscape that we have been building on, that no longer can we assume it will be there now and in the months and years ahead. So I'm going to turn it over to Susie to unpack a little bit about our process of raising these concerns. Susie?
Thanks, Ivan, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So as Ivan mentioned, to take stock of how the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee members and our Maine colleagues are being impacted, Ivan and I crafted an informal questionnaire shown here to our STS colleagues to take the pulse on science assets in Maine back in June. So assets, as Ivan mentioned, refer to funds to carry out monitoring, research funds, and money to pay the scientists who are doing this important work, ranging from graduate students to research staff. It was not intended to be an all-encompassing inventory of federal impacts on Maine science, but rather an informal survey of potential impacts to Maine's ability to study and respond to climate change. Next slide, please. On July 1st, Ivan and I wrote a letter to the Climate Council co-chairs expressing our concerns about how these lost and at-risk scientific assets could impact our ability to implement many of the goals in Maine Won't Wait. We included a 2-page summary of the questionnaire results, and part of that summary is shown here. You can see that we've included highlights, or in this case, lowlights, from a June snapshot of overall impacts on the University of Maine system, as well as other examples of lost and at-risk assets. So a few reflections from Ivan and I since June. Next slide, please. The landscape is constantly changing. The University of Maine has been releasing a monthly snapshot on changes impacting the UMaine system, and only now can I truly appreciate how much time this must take to track and produce, let alone to actually restore the awards. As of the last snapshot on August 28th, shown here, 23 awards had been terminated. On a positive note, many of the paused awards have been reinstated. But keep in mind, these were funds that were committed. People and programs were counting on these dollars. And Ivan and I found a similar trend over the last couple of weeks when trying to check in on the status of what the STS reported to us back in June. First, we found it very challenging and time-consuming to track down and verify all of the examples shared with us by our colleagues. Fortunately, in many cases, canceled or delayed funds had eventually come through, monitoring programs were restored, and some data sources that had been removed were appearing in alternate locations. So good news indeed, but this did not just happen magically. It happened because people stood up for science. So while we may be in a better place than we were in June in some ways, these were funds, programs, people that had been promised. The FY26 federal budget is not. As Ivan mentioned, this is not business as usual. Importantly, the overarching pattern that we've heard from our colleagues is the impact on the people doing the work and the reverberations of lost expertise and capacity. Next slide, please. One example of these cuts that has multiple implications for meeting our state climate goals is around the large personnel cuts and early retirements from the U.S. Forest Service and NASA. As you all know, in Maine Won't Wait, Strategy E is about protecting the environment and natural and working lands and waters in Maine. The impacts of these personnel cuts continue to accumulate and risk the erosion of our capacity to manage, monitor, and research carbon sequestration and other ecosystem services from our forests. There are several impacted goals in Maine Won't Wait, including Goal 2 shown here in Strategy E, develop new incentives to increase forest carbon storage. We know that forests cover 89% of Maine and sequester 91% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. So the loss of this expertise will impact our ability to meet conservation, carbon, biodiversity, and a long list of forest landscape resource objectives. Next slide, please. So just to review, the pace of change is in fact quite overwhelming. This is just our attempt to track what was already in place for Maine, not what is coming in the months and years ahead and the potential losses that may bring. So next steps and an ask to you all is first, continued advocacy. The fate of so many scientific assets critical to the implementation of Maine Won't Wait will depend on federal decisions in the months and years ahead. And secondly, to please consider a more coordinated effort to track the loss of capacity and direct our focus and future investment in Maine science assets. So I believe at this point, we may have a couple of minutes for questions and discussion, and thank you.
Ivan and Susie, thank you both so much for that summary. I know that you put a lot of time into trying to provide us with a really accurate assessment of what has happened. And I just wanted to reflect how, you can clearly see that you had a date by which you could be certain of the information you had that wasn't, just a couple of days ago, because this has been such a rapidly changing landscape. that it is really hard to keep up with what we may or may not continue to have access to in terms of scientific assets. So thank you so much for the work that you put into gathering this information for everyone. And as Dr. Arnold said, we do have some time if folks on the council have any questions. I'll try to make sure that I can see hands pop up. So if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask or contribute, we'd welcome that at this time. Well, I guess we hit everybody up for this too early. Excellent. Deb.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I thought I was talking, but I didn't have my mic on. It's Pat Strauch.
All right, go for it, Pat, and then Deb next.
I was saying great things, but nobody was responding. I'll try again. There's no doubt it's a challenging time, and I think we see it in the forest industry as well. But I'm a little concerned that we're using all aspects of the forest as the case for some concern in the last few slides. And I think it's tough for businesses to, in other words, I think the carbon markets are alive and are working. I think our ability to measure it and to understand it is what's in question. And I think the industry is, in some cases, successful with the federal government in terms of fighting budworm, which is a serious threat to climate change as well. So I just wanted to throw some of those ideas out there that just another perspective from the business side of things as it relates to forestry going forward. That's helpful.
I think that is a useful perspective. Appreciate you weighing in on that. Deb?
Yeah, I just had a question. Susie and Ivan, thank you so much for that sobering report. Do you know if there is what level of coordinated advocacy around science and around data there is federally? Are there particular organizations or institutions that are, again, coordinating any kind of messaging at the federal level?
I don't know of, and Susie might, of organizations that are sort of targeting the messaging that we have right here, in the sense of we need to think more about how well we will be able to track these changes in order to inform our decisions. I think the National Academy of Sciences, the Union of Concerned Scientists, some of the professional societies are indeed engaged with tracking and advocating for the retention of science assets, as we're calling them this morning. But I'm not sure I know of an organization doing what I think you're asking. I don't know. Susie?
The organizations I was thinking of that you already mentioned, Union of Concerned Scientists, consortiums of groups that are trying to move forward with national climate assessment. So lots of various groups stepping up, and I'm not sure of one in particular that's doing that overall coordination.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Melanie, I don't see how to raise my hand just now, but I would add the U.S. Climate Alliance to that list. I just downloaded their opposition to the rescinding of the endangerment finding and some of the data there. So I think they're definitely acting nationally and as a consortium of states. So something else to look at. And I actually can share what they posted, but I don't see the chat either today. So this is a little strange, but I could share it with you and get it to Deb.
That would be great. Thank you.
Do you have anybody else? I was thinking, going back to Pat's comment, that sounds like a really good conversation to be having in the working lands working group, talking about what kind of data we still have available that's going to be helpful for our members of the forest industry in Maine in terms of continuing to participate in those carbon markets. Some of that quantification and continuing to be able to have the data that they need that's going to be useful for that, I think will be an important conversation to continue having. Any other thoughts for the Science and Technical Subcommittee? Sorry if the raise hand feature is clunky, so if somebody is trying to talk and you want to just weigh in, please go ahead and just do so.
This is Melissa Law. I'm the agriculture representative to the council. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Ivan and Susie. And yeah, I just wanted to share that in terms of some of the projects that have been paused or put on hold temporarily and then returned later, the fact that they've been given their funding back and that they've been able to come back online is really positive. But just anecdotally, I have seen some of those projects kind of have to unwind because of the pause in funding and because personnel have to seek other employment opportunities because they can't live in the uncertainty of whether their salary is going to be continued or not. And so I do think it's important to note that those disruptions are having a really big impact on Mainers' lives. So that the return of funding is great, but sometimes it means that personnel have been lost or even just progress that had momentum has been disturbed and disrupted. And so I think just the overarching point that the federal actions are having a huge impact in so many different industries, agriculture being my area. But I think it's just important to note that just these disruptions are having a huge impact on Mainers' lives.
It's such a great point, Melissa. I think we're seeing that with so many of the projects that were connected to federal funding, that having this sort of on and off again experience is making it really difficult. That I think collectively, one of the things that we're going to need to be talking about going into the next year is strategically, when we're thinking about looking for federal funding, using state funding, looking at philanthropic opportunities, all of the funding opportunities, we're thinking about recognizing that federal landscape could be very unreliable, that even if the money comes through in the end, that going through exactly the kind of cycle that you just described makes it really difficult to get these projects off the ground if that's the whole basis for the funding for them. So hopefully we can all work together to think about how do we stay resilient through that kind of cycle and make these projects really successful. Anybody else? All right, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. And thank you again to Ivan and Susie and the STS for pulling this together. This is really helpful information to have presented. So thank you for doing that. I also just want to note that we're seeing some of these risks come through in the work we're doing to collect the updates for the December 1 Climate Council Annual Progress Report. And so that report will be the focus of the Council's December 1st meeting. And so this conversation will continue at that meeting as well. So next we're going to hear from a few agency leaders to dig a little bit deeper into some of the changes that they are seeing. We're going to hear from Amanda Beal, Dan Burgess, and Ann Fuchs. They'll discuss how the federal changes are affecting the implementation of Maine Won't Wait, and how even in the face of those headwinds, Maine is still leading on climate action. So we'll hear from each speaker, and then we'll have time for discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Amanda Beal from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the recommendations that came up through the Natural and Working Lands Group, and talking about some of the progress that we're making, mostly in our department, but a lot of these points will reflect collaboration, which of course is incredibly important to getting anything done and done well. So, but I just want to acknowledge up front that I know there's a lot of other work going on in other agencies and other organizations throughout the state, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stick pretty close to what I know most directly that we're working on. So we'll jump to the next slide. So before I do that, I do just want to say that that whole discussion, the presentation, comments by Dr. Arnold, Commissioner Loisem, Melissa, you said a lot of what I wanted to say in this slide, but there are a few things I'll just put a finer point on. We definitely are working in a challenging environment. USDA has cut an estimated over 21,000 positions at this point in time, and it ranks third in all of the federal agencies that have cut positions. So as you can imagine, that creates a lot of complications, in addition to all of the sort of different messaging that we've been getting around funding, and the tap is on, the tap is off, the program's gone away, the program's come back. That creates a lot of work for us internally to try to follow. And so, along with that comes the uncertainty of knowing whether or not we will have funding for a program, creating a lot of staff turnover, having to go back out and re-recruit once we know the funding is back, putting a real sort of pause or a drag on the work itself. And that's happened across the board in a number of different programs that we administer, from the Forest Service to our agricultural programs and conservation and beyond. So that's what we've been doing, is trying to keep up and kind of follow the bouncing ball and figure out what's going on, while keeping our programmatic work hopefully mostly seamless looking from the outside, but not in all cases, I'm absolutely certain. And the other thing I just wanted to say is just, this does, and I think Melissa reflected on this really well, create a real uncertain environment for businesses. And so we're seeing a real decrease in response time for questions to federal agencies, to programs within the USDA, and that is definitely impacting our business environment. And so with that, I think I'll just go to the next slide, because I think everyone else has made all the other points I wanted to make on that. Despite the confusion and the chaos, we are making progress on our target goals here. And this is in terms of the goal around developing new incentives to increase forest carbon storage. And actually, this is in a different order than I have them in, but that's okay. I can pivot here. I wanted to just say that BPL, our Bureau of Public Lands, it continues to discuss opportunities for climate-friendly forestry. In particular, we're hoping to get some funding through NEF for implementing some practices on our Round Pond Public Lands Unit. And meanwhile, this is actually a good story. Maine Forest Service is going to be launching a new cost share program through the WoodsWise Climate and Carbon Program for Maine landowners. And this was made possible by 2 successful grants that we got through the USDA Forest Service Landowner Support Program. The funding, we were awarded the funds, they were paused in January of 2025, but they have been restored. So we're moving forward and we are working on landowner eligibility criteria. And so there'll be more to come on that project. And we can go to the next slide. And this is on the conservation goal around natural and working lands to get to 30% by 2030. One of the things that we've just learned about recently is that our allocation of land and water conservation funding has increased quite significantly. The state allocation for this fiscal year will be $3.8 million. I have an asterisk next to this bullet because it's really important that I mention that we absolutely understand and share concerns that funding has been pulled from places that we think are important and moved into state allocation buckets. We have always advocated for more funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund overall, and that continues to be our message. And I just wanted to say that, you know, this doesn't come without some concerns. We are currently at about 22.5% conserved lands in the state. We've acknowledged that our goal to get to 30% by 2030 is very, very assertive, and we continue to sort of reassess what that might mean. But I am happy to say that our Bureau of Public Lands is working with partners on 8 conservation programs right now, projects right now that total more than 150,000 acres across the state. Most of these are working forest easements. And then also there is a collaboration of nonprofits that's working to conserve another 78,000 acres in Western Maine. And again, I just want to put a finer point on that collaboration. It's so important, and we're really grateful for that and for the leadership of other organizations that we're working with. We're also we're in preliminary conversations about creating a farmland action plan. That was one specific recommendation that came through. And finally, I just want to make a point on this slide about how it is really critical that we replenish our Land for Maine's future funds. And to that point, I will say that we allocated the very last of the designated funds for farmland protection in January of this year. So that pot is depleted, and we will have allocated all of the remaining $3.3 million left in the other buckets for LMF by the end of this fiscal year, and I predict it will actually be before that. But that is why I'm just putting it out there that eyes on the Land for Maine's future program as we roll into the second half of this legislative session is going to be really important. And I think I have one more slide. Here we go. Yeah, so on the goal around increasing food consumption in Maine from state food producers to 30% by 2030, I want to acknowledge that the LFPA program was cut. It has ended. This is a program that was really important to us, but not only us. There's been a lot of bipartisan feedback on this program and how valuable it has been. It allowed us to really funnel quite a significant amount of money into the emergency food system by paying farmers, Maine farmers, to grow food for the emergency food system and making that food accessible to people who are in need. And it has been pretty universally well regarded. And so there is some legislation that's been introduced, and we are hearing some rumbles from back channels as well that this program is likely to come back under a different name. So we're keeping our eyes peeled for that. Another really positive piece of work here is that the Maine Harvest Bucks and Farm Fresh Rewards program in our last biennial budget, we established an ongoing allocation of $600,000 to match federally funded nutrition benefits that flow through these programs. And the beauty of this program is that it utilizes existing infrastructure through retailers and, through grocery stores and farmers markets to move food. And it gives folks who participate in SNAP the ability to choose which fresh foods or Maine grown fresh foods are best for them. And it supports our farmers. So that's a win-win-win. And then finally, I'll just say that we are also in preliminary conversations about creating an overarching Maine food plan, like so many of our neighboring states have done, and those conversations will continue. So that's some of the work we're able to continue moving forward. And I'll just say again, this is also likewise just a snapshot of what we're working on at DACF, and also to acknowledge that again, there's a lot of other work going on around the state. So thank you.
Great. Amanda, thank you so much. And now I want to hear from Dan Burgess, who is the acting commissioner for the new Department of Energy Resources. Dan?
Yeah, good morning. Good to see everybody. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the federal impacts. If we can go to the next slide. Sarah mentioned at the outset, the Energy Office and state have, following BIL and the passage of BIL and IRA, the governor directed state agencies via executive order to maximize the benefits of those laws and advance state goals. And I'm really proud of the work of the Energy Office and many folks on this call for coordinating on bringing energy-related federal funds to the state. We were, as Sarah mentioned, awarded more than $200 million in both formula and competitive funds. You'll see that list on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side is a list which I think is probably doesn't capture all of the energy-related funds, but gives you a good snapshot of energy related funds or energy-focused funds coming to Maine that were awarded for another $700 million. So getting close to that, and I think probably surpassing the $1 billion mark of energy-focused federal grants to the state. Today we're have hired staff on many of these, or are working with our partners at entities such as Efficiency Maine or Maine State Housing to implement them. They're in various stages of implementation, or even some of the awards, we're waiting to hear back on the status of. A few I would highlight that you may have seen in the newspaper. The first is that the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate, or HEAR, HEAR, the $36 million that has come to the Energy Office but is being administered by Efficiency Maine Trust. That program is active and available for low-income consumers to upgrade their heating systems in mobile or manufactured homes. So that program is active and ongoing, and we've seen good results from that. Program was launched about actually just a year ago last week. And I think as the certainty around that program continues, we're going to see more uptick of that. The other half of that program is related to funding electrification at new affordable housing. And so we've seen, in coordination with Maine Housing, good uptick in that as well. The other half of that program is the Home Energy Rebate Program, HER, which is a efficiency initiative. We're still waiting for guidance and next steps from the U.S. Department of Energy there. And you may have seen the EPA is attempting to cancel or terminate the state Solar for All award in conjunction with the other national awards that have been received. We're slated to receive $62 million for solar programs and storage programs focused on low and moderate income. And we are currently monitoring that situation, and we'll let this group know if there are updates to provide. A couple of other highlights I might mention is we have actively awarded the $6.6 million in grid resilience upgrades through the Maine grid upgrade program, or grid resilience grant program, excuse me. And we've had a chance to visit some of those projects and kind of see the impact that those projects are having, upgrading the electric grid. And actually 5 out of the 6 awards were in municipal utilities. So it's great to see the progress of that. And then just last week, RFP was due for the final grant there on the left for energy efficiency contractor training. And so, some of these programs are underway and moving forward. On the right, I would flag some of the larger awards that we're still monitoring and looking forward to hearing more of the status update would be around the Power Up New England project. And we've been working closely with the other partners on the heat pump accelerator. So a lot of time in our office spent monitoring and with many of you on the call, but that's the update on federal grants. If you go to the next slide, we are, as has been mentioned here, there's obviously shifting federal energy policy over the last 9.5 months. We're seeing climate and energy regulations either rolled back, such as on emissions threshold, as Commissioner Loizen mentioned, appliance standards, obviously on vehicles. There's been, Sarah mentioned the federal tax credits, which have been cut for home efficiency or home efficiency or clean energy measures, and then some of the larger ITC and investment tax credit or production tax credit changes as well, which will impact the overall economics of some of these projects. And then, I think we're also obviously seeing new energy priorities out of the administration. A lot of focus on the data centers and the need to ensure there's energy to power those data centers. We're seeing a focus on things like nuclear, opportunities for advanced geothermal, both on heating and cooling, but also the power sector, as well as, I think, continued interest in things like energy storage, particularly coming out of OBBB. And so we work really closely with like Commissioner Beal. There, we have an association of energy officials that meet regularly. I know she does as well for agricultural offices. That's been really valuable, and particularly on a bipartisan basis in the energy office, to compare notes and see what all states are kind of dealing with and managing and coordinating on these issues. So I will say that we've had good engagement federally there. And then lastly, as was mentioned, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide, we continue to take action, advancing state leadership. If we could go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thanks. Advancing state leadership through legislation. So Sarah mentioned establishing the new Department of Energy Resources, which went into effect yesterday, which not only ensures that we have a durable energy office with staff expertise and the team that we've built here. We're excited to kind of transition to the department. It also allows the office to do clean energy procurements based on the state's energy plan. 1868 was mentioned, which requires 100% clean and renewable energy by 2040. And then we've just saw the results this week from the Public Utilities Commission or I guess last week, on LD 597, which expedited backfilling of renewable energy procurements, where they selected cost-effective projects for Maine, around 260 megawatts. That clean energy procurement on that next bullet was the 257 megawatts. That was well timed with bipartisan legislation to expedite those procurements and will hopefully allow those projects to take advantage of the sunsetting tax credits. We are working really closely with our regional partners, both at the state level in New England and the Northeast, as well as with the monitoring activities around us in the Eastern Canadian provinces. We are engaging with the federal government, as I mentioned, and particularly doing a lot of work with National Association of State Energy Officials. And then I think the opportunities of coordination that kind of fit with a lot of this work and the state's energy plan are new opportunities with a new maybe potential funding, or at least technical assistance related to things like advanced geothermal, new energy storage, looking at existing nuclear opportunities, or there's been interest in small modular reactors. I think there continues to be interest in the transmission needed to help meet some of our targets. And then, like I said, a lot of interest in load growth from data center and manufacturing development, and then also a continued focus on permitting. So it's a busy time in the energy space, and we are kind of monitoring a lot of the federal grant activity, and then working closely with our partners across the across the Northeast and across the country on engagement opportunities with DOE. So with that, I will turn it over to the next presenter. Thanks, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And now I want to turn it over to Ann Fuchs, who is the Director of Mitigation and Recovery at Maine's Emergency Management Agency. Ann?
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And major thanks to Sarah, Melanie, and supporting team for inviting MEMA to participate in the panel this morning. Just like everybody else, MEMA is adjusting to kind of this dynamic environment and updating guidance and policies as we receive information coming in from our federal partners. Just continuing to take those steps to make sure MEMA and staff are postured to respond and recover to anything that might come into the state of Maine. But in particular for this presentation, I'll be focusing on how we're ensuring movement across the Climate Council's proposed strategies. So focusing on our initiatives as they apply mostly to Maine Climate Council, I'll be offering updates across the areas of mitigation planning and mitigation grants. And just to be clear and transparent, it's really what directly applies to Strategy F, building healthy and resilient communities. So kicking off first with the planning side of the house, as of April and May timeframe, FEMA announced that they'll no longer require plans to address climate change, underserved communities, or socially vulnerable populations. So inherently what that means is they no longer require or review this content as it exceeds their current applicable FEMA mitigation planning requirements for local and state hazard mitigation plans. But the good news is the state still has the ability to encourage and work with those going through the planning process on updating their plans to incorporate climate change, underserved communities, and socially vulnerable populations, as these remain priority items for the state of Maine. Moving over to FEMA mitigation grants. We've been speaking about the cancellation of the BRIC program for many, many months now. And so it's not news to this platform that in the early April timeframe, FEMA made the announcement that BRIC would be coming to an end, leaving all projects that had not yet been awarded, including applications that had been selected for further review or those actually in the application process, that they would be unable to move forward for consideration. So the update on that, as a result, Maine joined 19 other states in a lawsuit in July to challenge FEMA's termination of the BRIC program. So since the filing, all participating states have been granted a preliminary injunction. So inherently what that means is that we were able to protect the federal funding originally reserved for the program, the BRIC program, from being used for something else. So while the lawsuit does proceed and probably will for months to come, FEMA regional staff, MEMA staff, and Maine sub-applicants all remain on standby for further guidance and next steps. Another change that was announced earlier this year, this applies to all FEMA hazard mitigation assistance grant programs, is the benefit cost analysis discount rate has been adjusted by the U.S. Office of Management Budget from 3.1% to 7%. So the benefit cost analysis, or BCA for short, is part of the eligibility process for hazard mitigation assistance grants. So inherently, FEMA uses the federal discount rate, which is an estimate of how the value of benefits and costs decreases over time, to calculate the net present value of proposed hazard mitigation projects. So projects that have been awarded by FEMA as of April 8th, 2025, must now use the 7% discount rate when using the BCA process, which inherently just makes the eligibility process a little bit harder for Maine applicants, for all applicants across the nation. And to be clear, the current grant programs that we have running are the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and Flood Mitigation Assistance. FEMA and the U.S. Office of Management and Budget are creating metrics for states to prove the need and ability to effectively utilize future hazard mitigation grant program funding. So this is something we continue to try to retain more information on from our regional and headquarters partners. Historically, for the state of Maine to actually pursue hazard mitigation grant program funding, we would incorporate like a checkbox within the major disaster declaration request process between the governor and the President of the United States. Moving forward, FEMA and OMB are evaluating a new process for states, which incorporates new metrics that inherently justify the state's need and ability to utilize funding within the restraints of the program. We do not know what this will look like. We just know that this is something being discussed at the federal level. Flood mitigation assistance, one of the two programs I mentioned, and Safeguarding Tomorrow revolving loan fund. Notice of funding opportunities remain in review status. Both of these NOFOs were rescinded in the April timeframe to amend to align with new executive orders under the current administration. So these amended NOFOs have not yet been received for either program. In fact, the Safeguarding Tomorrow revolving loan fund is due September 30th per the original notice of funding opportunity. So we're still posturing to meet that deadline, even though the amended notice of funding opportunity has not yet been released. We do understand these are being worked on and that all states should be receiving amended NOFOs and potentially, I say potentially, new deadlines within the coming months. So we as MEMA team with our FEMA partners are just kind of standing by for what's to come there. Okay. And then lastly on this slide, FEMA staffing has certainly, along with a lot of our federal partners across the federal family, changed. The dynamic of FEMA staffing has changed. They've had significant staffing loss. It's not public information at this time how many FEMA staff have been lost nationally or regionally. We don't have those numbers. But just like everyone else, we are experiencing a loss of significant subject matter expertise, delays in communication, and just the backlogging of projects because we're all just kind of waiting for what the next steps will be on unlimited staffing. The two things which I could spend a lot of time talking about these are Executive Order 14180, which President Trump announced his desire for a FEMA Review Council back in the April timeframe, and also HR 4669, Fixing Emergency Management for Americans or FEMA Act of 2025. It's clear the Trump administration has expressed its displeasure with FEMA and the future of FEMA, and in turn, changes to the role of states in disaster management still remains a bit unclear. We're posturing accordingly, doing everything we can to make kind of different plans for different scenarios while we wait for this executive order, FEMA Review Council, and this FEMA Act of 2025 to kind of play out. So essentially, the executive order called to order the FEMA Review Council January 2025, excuse me, I previously said April, with the goal of drafting recommendations to the president on changes to FEMA. 3 publicly viewable meetings have been held to date. I've watched every single one of them, with members being held to a final report deadline of November 16th. Alternatively, the separate initiative, the FEMA Act of 2025, was introduced to the U.S. House by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and as of September 3rd, was ordered to be reported to the House at large. It's important to note this one is a congressionally bipartisan effort, hugely bipartisan, and under this bill, there's reform measures as significant as moving FEMA to an independent agency that reports directly to the president and not the Department of Homeland Security. So the tone and support for FEMA is drastically different across these two platforms, the FEMA Review Council and this act being put forward for consideration. So all states remain highly engaged in the monitoring process across both of these initiatives and just planning accordingly, posturing accordingly until we have more information. Next slide, please. So MEMA's continued progress. Some of the things have already been announced in meetings prior and by Sarah when we kicked off this meeting, but just to kind of reiterate some of the successes, since we're dealing with so many potentially heavy impacts, it's important to just notice the progress, the momentum that we continue to have as an agency and with our state partners when it comes to this Maine Climate Council platform. LD1, an act to increase storm preparedness for Maine's communities, homes, and infrastructure. We've talked a lot about this, but it did add 2 new limited period positions to support building out the state's first mitigation-based revolving loan fund. That's the Safeguarding Tomorrow revolving loan fund I mentioned that we'll be applying to next week by the September 30th deadline. This is pending application submission and grant award, but inherently LD1 offered us the opportunity to pursue this as an agency for the state with a dedicated limited period position, but also state cost match to support our ask for that program. We were also awarded an integrated public alert and warning coordinator. Sarah mentioned that previously. And so that will inherently help the state build out its communications and training opportunities as well. $10 million to the Disaster Recovery Fund to meet the state's obligation to provide a 15% cost share towards recent declared disaster events. It was a major victory. So that's LD1 in a short as it comes to Maine Emergency Management Agency. Moving forward to biennial budget, we also had a lot of successes there. Very pleased as an agency for the state support, legislative support in this. We were able to reduce our reliance on federal grants. We did have a large number of our staff heavily dependent on federal grant programs to be able to pursue and keep initiatives moving forward. And through the biennial budget process, we were able to move a number of grant management positions in particular to include the state hazard mitigation officer, which oversees all these hazard mitigation assistance opportunities, to state funding to kind of safeguard and secure that position moving forward. We're also super happy to announce further investment in emergency management as the state approved shifting 2 federally funded limited period position mitigation positions to full-time headcount, 2 federally funded limited period position recovery positions to full-time headcount, and also allowed for 2 more federally funded recovery headcount positions. That was a big win for MEMA and all the towns that we support in particular. We were drastically understaffed, and we're excited to be building out our recovery and mitigation teams. 2 more things, and that'll wrap it up. September was proclaimed Preparedness Month in Maine. So MEMA's director and department leadership worked directly with Governor Mills on advancing September as Preparedness Month in the state of Maine. Governor Mills made the announcement with the intent of encouraging Maine people to be prepared for extreme weather and other natural disasters, really kind of based on these last several years of really intense and frequent disasters. And this was a crucial step in acknowledging that preparedness really starts with the individual. Let's see. Lastly, I'm wrapping up here. This is a recent announcement. So on September 18, 2025, Governor Mills signed Executive Order Number 1. We're very proud of that. Updating the state government partners and responsibilities across disaster response and recovery under an order updating the state of Maine emergency response and disaster recovery teams executive order. Our Director of Operations and Response has been working with emergency response teams or ERT partners, and I continue to work with our disaster recovery team partners to coordinate commissioner and director level disaster recovery experience and expertise and coordination in preparedness across all member agencies leading up to the next disaster event. That's everything I have. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne, Amanda, and Dan, for those really excellent presentations. And I want to just open it up now to see if there are counselors who have questions or comments. And as Melanie said earlier, I know it can be a little tricky to find the raise hand function, so feel free to just come off mute if you'd like.
Hey, Sarah, I'll just say that in the face of all of this, how enormously proud I am to live in Maine and what we're doing.
Thanks, Judy. Other comments or questions for any of the presenters? Okay. Well, I'll just chime in that what I took away from all three presentations is that even as we face pretty significant federal headwinds and this uncertainty continues, that was really clear from all three of you as well. It's really exciting that Maine continues to push forward in meeting our goals. So thank you to all three of you for taking the time to share those updates and for all of your hard work to keep us going, to continue to implement the strategies in Maine Won't Wait. It's really heartening to see the work that you're all doing and that others on the councilors are doing as well. So thank you for that. I wanted to just remind folks that we aren't alone in doing this work. Earlier this week, I was at a U.S. Climate Alliance event in New York. The U.S. Climate Alliance is a bipartisan coalition of 24 governors that are committed to climate action. And the Alliance represents 54% of the US population and 57% of the national economy. And the announcement on Wednesday was that collectively, the Alliance is meeting our emissions goals. So that was a really positive announcement. We are doing the things and they are working, and we are making progress on our emissions goals. So I thought that was a really helpful reminder, and it is encouraging me to remain a part of the US Climate Alliance. Many of us have been a part of this council from the very beginning. When we first released Maine Won't Wait in 2020, we created a really ambitious blueprint and one that we did not yet have the resources to fully implement. But the plan's ambition positioned us to take full advantage of historic federal investments, including the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure law in subsequent 4 years after release of Maine Won't Wait. We're in a different federal policy environment now than we were then, and than we were in 2024 when we released our most recent update to Maine Won't Wait. But I believe that our collective commitment will help us continue to navigate these headwinds and prioritize climate action that serves Maine people. And so there are two really exciting ways that we wanted to highlight for all of you today that we're making progress in Maine. And so in this next session of the agenda, we're going to hear from Samantha Horn, who is the director of the Maine Office of Community Affairs. And we'll hear again from Dan Burgess, the acting commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources, about the work of their agencies to move forward the strategies in Maine Won't Wait. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha Horn. Thanks, Samantha.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you today. We're in construction mode around here, but it's good to take a minute and visit with this august and committed group. So I just want to give you a brief update on what we're up to. So we're, if you can go to the next slide, please. We are an office that we've just turned about 1 year old from when we were created. And now with new folks joining us, which I'll talk about in a second, we're gaining steam. We are meant to be a one-stop shop for communities. And this purpose statement here is highlighting communications and partnerships between the state and communities, and providing a coordinated and efficient planning, technical assistance, and financial support. So that's really the core of what our purpose is as a new organization. Can you continue to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this was just a few days ago. We still have cubes disassembled, but we're getting there. In a week or so, we'll have our office pulled together. Yesterday was our official merger date when the Part 2 budget brought into our office 7 programs from 6 agencies that existed in state government. And so we'll be close to 40 people now with some additional hires coming on board. We just are hiring our support staff. So we've been sort of working with baling wire and duct tape a little bit because we didn't have a secretary, we didn't have a financial person. So we've really appreciated the help from all of the departments that are sending programs. You've all been wonderful in pitching in and helping us get through this time. But as of next week, we will have a secretary and a financial person, which will be super. And the Natural Resources Service Center has really stepped in to help fill that gap as well. So very much appreciate that. Lots of people I could thank directly, but the list would be too long. So a couple of hires that we're still waiting for are the LD1 hires, which they're in the pipeline for our hiring authorization, and we're hoping to get those soon so we can get going on all the good work that Sarah mentioned at the top of the meeting in LD1. And we're merging budgets from 6 different departments into a new office. So we're running into things like, we'll say, so we want to put this FJA or this purchasing thing in, and they're like, oh, gee, you're not in our system. So we're working through all of that stuff. It's going to take us about 6 weeks, I think, to get really settled in the new space and with a phone system working and all of that. So we're looking at mid-November as a time when we'll be presentable and ready to be up and running to really help folks, community leaders in particular, who want some information about how they can access state resources for this one-stop shop concept. On the funding front, a lot of our funding is still in place. It was a bit of a dicey time over the spring, but we still have most of that funding. One of the items on Dan's slide regarding code and federal funding for code enforcement is sort of a big deal, and we're not counting on it, but we're hoping that potentially it could come through eventually. But that is one area that was really frustrating to not have appear as we had hoped. But our other federal funding is largely in place. There's some risks, obviously, in the next round for programs like Volunteer Maine. We're concerned that that may not continue, and so we're keeping a close eye on that. Well, come mid-November, we'll be in a better position to introduce a central phone line where folks can call us and get either an answer or a warm handoff to someone who can help them. And we heard from a lot of community leaders that it was really hard to figure out which department to contact for any given issue. And sometimes it's multiple departments for any given issue. So we're going to try to remedy that by having a helpful, consistent presence to be able to answer questions for folks. We do have a generic email address available too at the moment. So it's info.moca@maine.gov. And it's really cool to see people already collaborating with each other. Oh, sorry, well, you can just see me in the dark. Some of the staff had never even known about each other before, and now they're talking regularly, and it's exciting. So that we're putting the seating in the office together so that folks like the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, the Housing Opportunity Program, the Floodplain Program, and the Code Enforcement Program are all sort of like facing each other in this bullpen kind of arrangement. So literally the housing program can just lean over and say, hey, code enforcement, or hey, municipal planning, or hey, floodplain, what do you think about this issue? And I think that's really going to help a lot. So I'm very excited about this going forward. I wanted to I'm going to do a quick run through on legislative stuff because the list is long, and if there's anything people want to dig into or ask more about, I'm happy to talk about that, but I want to not overwhelm you today. But we're doing things like housing rulemaking on the significant housing bills, an impact fee working group, the LD1 startup for all of these amazing projects and are going to be happening with the LD1 money, growth management stakeholder group, Working Waterfront Advisory Council, a Working Waterfront Technical Assistance and Information Fund, constituting the Development Ready Advisory Committee, which I think is going to be a really important coordinating function, and you'll hear more about another time. A higher education service corps study, and we're participating in a number of other groups like mobility management, barriers to housing development, manufactured housing study, those sorts of things. We're also keeping an eye on subdivision bills that were carried over and Maine Service Fellows bill that was carried over in addition to other pieces. And then when resources allow, we are meant to do an outdoor lighting ordinance, model ordinance. So a sampling of the stuff that we have going on, but there was a fair amount of the legislature seeing an opportunity to have an outlet for some of the things that they'd like to get done. We are very happy to be doing all of those things. We will be working on them, trying to play a little bit of catch up because of the Part 2 budget timing. We did just come together this week. So we'll be working on those into the next year. And then I just wanted to give you a sampling of some of the new initiatives that we're undertaking in addition to what the legislature gave us. So one of the things I heard was that technical assistance can be hard to locate because it's scattered all over the place. And there also can be some pieces of it that are out of date or missing. So we're undertaking an initiative to bring together lots of pieces of technical assistance and create new ones. And I think this is going to be helpful, not just for people who are contacting us directly, but I think it'll be particularly helpful for organizations who are out in the state helping communities directly, because they won't need to generate technical assistance documents or search around to find them. There will be a central repository. And I think that's going to be important for efficiency and for lowering frustration levels about finding resources that we need. I think it will really move all of our efforts ahead. Another sample of what we're up to is I also heard that it's really hard for people to find each other and to work together on specific issues, or for communities to find the particular person they need to connect with, whether they're inside or outside of state government. And so we're working on a tool that would let individuals self-subscribe in and say, hey, I'm working on these things, and bring the network together so that it's easier for people to find the resources that they need, or to connect with collaborators. Both of those things I just talked about are very early stage. We're working on them as concepts, looking for funding and partners. But I think they're very important efforts that will really serve as a backbone for lots of other organizations that are doing great work on the ground and make everyone's efforts more efficient. And then I'll mention we're working with the regional councils now that many of the agencies that they contract with are all together now. Surely we can do more to increase efficiency there. And to have a good, strong working relationship between state government and the regional councils. And we're seeing lots of discussion across elements of MOCA to think about how we can do grant making and other types of activities with coordination, so that when communities see an opportunity for funding or an opportunity to receive technical assistance, it looks like we've done the coordinating before they get to us, instead of us having to do that in response to one particular question. One thing I wanted to particularly note is that there is we really need to put an emphasis on building capacity in the code enforcement program. We had received initial word through Dan's shop that there was going to be some federal money there. That's been on hold for a very long time. We had a BRIC grant application in, and we all know what happened with that program. And so, it's a program that has about a $300,000 annual budget, and it's just not meeting the needs of the state, not because of a failure on the part of the staff, there just isn't enough capacity. And we're seeing that come up a lot in the working groups that are being run. And so that's something I'm going to be thinking about quite a bit in this next few months. And then was that my last slide, I think, maybe, or did we have one more? I can't remember. That may be it.
I think that's the last one.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's a quick hit. We're on the fly this week as we all have the moving vans coming and going. And Melanie knows this well. She moved out of this space not that long ago. So we're reassembling all the cubes that you had to disassemble, Melanie. But we're making great progress. We're excited about the potential going forward. And I think the staff is just jumping in and helping in amazing ways that go above and beyond their normal job duties. So they're making it with a little bit of a on the fly, build it while you fly it kind of plan. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but also feel free to contact me separately if you have questions about how this office is unfolding. happy to talk about how we can collaborate with partners. Particularly in a month or so, I'll have more bandwidth to do that, but I would love to get something on the calendar if people want to talk about how we can collaborate. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Samantha. It's great to hear how MOCA is making it easier for communities to find and access opportunities. So really appreciate that update. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dan Burgess.
Great. Nice to be able to talk to you all again. So I'm going to run through the creation of the Maine Department of Energy Resources, or DOER. Recognizing the critical need to ensure affordable, reliable energy for Maine people and businesses, the Governor Mills proposed in our most recent budget the creation of this department, which elevates the prior governor's energy office, which was in the governor's office, moves it outside of the office to its standalone cabinet level Department of Energy for the state of Maine. Little bit of history. The energy offices were generally created across the country in response to the oil crises of the 1970s. Maine's first energy office, the Maine Office of Energy Resources, was established in 1973 by Governor Curtis and the state legislature, and that group actually wasn't fully funded until around 1974 or 75. But the first energy plan came out in 1975, and I want to highlight a couple of items there of that plan, which were to have state officials ensure adequate supply of reliable, affordable energy, protect the environment and public safety, improve energy efficiency, promote in-state energy development, and share critical information with the public. So as we, 5 decades later, you can see these principles, I think, playing out in energy today, obviously with a different flavor and a different time and setting with different technologies. But, this change to having a Department of Energy Resources is also in line with about 40 other states which have energy represented at the cabinet level. They look different. Sometimes it's energy and environment. Other times it's energy with an economic development lens, but this change will support a more durable and integrated approach and more consistent approach to planning and management and policy and programs related to Maine's energy system. And so we're excited to have this launched yesterday. And, we're going to be prioritizing and see this as a really positive to cultivate and maintain staff knowledge, capacity, and durability, improving, and with that, I think comes the opportunity to improve internal and external alignment of our collective work. Obviously going to continue to advance the state's leadership in the kind of increasingly complex regional energy landscape, and generally enhance the overall approach to planning and clean energy procurements that we talked about to ensure that we have a diverse portfolio of resources that allow us to meet our goals and targets of affordable, reliable, and ultimately cleaner energy. So if you go to the next slide, this is just a flavor of some of the work that the office is going to be doing. Our structure, you can see the chart on the right at a high level with kind of 4 different divisions of one focused on planning and policy, so developing the state energy plan, but also designing future clean energy procurements as designed by the legislature or as directed by the legislature. So what that means is our Public Utilities Commission has been the entity which has been for the last decade, when directed by the legislature, they've gone out for long-term contracts through competitive procurements for new clean energy resources. But in most states in the Northeast, it's the executive branch of the department that has at least started or led those procurements. And so in Maine, we're going to be moving from the Public Utilities Commission undertaking the whole process to this new department, utilizing the energy plan and then going out for competitive clean energy procurements. Those will still all be regulated and approved by the Public Utilities Commission. They have to be cost effective in order to pass muster. And I think, we're excited to have this more aligned with other states in the Northeast and to be able to provide that kind of predictable schedule for developments to consider. We're going to be doing planning and policy. We're going to have another group focused on energy supply and energy security. A lot of this work happens already within the office. And, we have a state energy security plan. We have a review of our renewable portfolio standards. We spent a lot of time, again, working with regional partners and on energy topics. And so a lot of that work will happen there. The third group will be focused on initiatives related to energy efficiency, which are, I think, well known to this group, coordinating with Efficiency Maine Trust, Maine Housing, GoPIF, MOCA, all things on the various items of both of the built environment and the demand side. So looking at buildings, transportation, load flexibility, and demand side management, all those activities which the Climate Council has talked about. I think we're also going to have that group, and across the others have a real focus on data collection, analysis, and dissemination. We already monitor and report on things like heating fuel prices, electricity prices, going to be looking at petroleum inventories, et cetera. Finally, we have a group in the office that is focused on economy and innovation. So that is working with the Department of Labor on clean energy and energy efficiency workforce development, working with our partners at Department of Economic and Community Development on things like innovation or opportunities for load growth or economic investment. And so we'll have a team that's focused there. Those are the kind of four general divisions with, we take a lot of constituent calls and questions from a wide variety of people. We'll continue to do that in partnership with the PUC and OPA, Public Utilities Commission, and the Public Advocate's Office. Yeah, we're excited to have the division stood up. We still have the same webpage, maine.gov/energy, the same emails. None of that is changing. We are excited to have yesterday be the launch day, and more to come. So happy to take questions, and happy to both kind of hear, and then if other folks have questions offline, please don't hesitate to be in touch. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. So now we have a few moments if counselors have questions for either Samantha or Dan about either of the new departments. And what an exciting day yesterday was for both of you. So congratulations. Any questions for either Dan or Samantha? Okay. Well, more to come, and you all have their contact information if you want to follow up about anything. But again, congratulations to both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your updates with us. We have a few more updates to provide before we start to wrap up the meeting. I want to turn the floor over to Paige Nichols from the Department of Education, and she and Glenn Cummings are going to share updates on the new Maine Green Schools Network. Paige, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Paige Nichols, Chief Innovation Officer at the Department of Ed and Climate Council member. I'm actually just going to introduce Glenn and pass it off to him because he really has the meat of the presentation. Glenn Cummings, we hired just exactly a year ago, actually, as the Green Schools Director. And he's done a really amazing job generating energy around the decarbonization of school buildings. So he has a lot to share with you. And with limited time, I think I'll just pass it right off to him. You're up, Glenn.
Thank you, Paige. Can everybody hear me okay? Working okay? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, as you know, we've been working pretty hard over the last year with the Green Schools program. It's hard to believe, but our nation's public schools are probably, next to the military, the largest polluter in the public sector. So this is a very important thing, just in terms of carbon reduction in our facilities and in our vehicles, but also obviously it contains the seed, so to speak, of what we can do with the next generation, and how important it is for us to be teaching about some of the important elements of climate change and how to create a sustainable world. Next slide. So in that spirit, we have some really good news. We have the first ever Green School Symposium. You will all be getting your invite from Hillary soon after this meeting. So I hope you all register. I know it's something near and dear to many of you. We already have well over 100 youth educators, community members, nonprofit groups, for-profit groups as well. We are focusing on 4 major pieces, what we call parts of the compass. Number 1 is most importantly leadership in the school sector around moving towards more sane approaches to how we go about heating our schools, cooling our schools, and educating our students related to climate change. This will be November 7th at Thomas College, and we are filling up rapidly, so please sign up and come join us. The first element, as I said, is leadership. The second one is around facilities. We'll have a whole section on facilities with facility managers across the state. And then third, around curriculum. And then fourth, we'll be focused on career pathways for moving into the green and environmental sector and how we prepare our students both in technical and in more broad areas around the emerging world of how we deal with climate change. So very exciting, and I hope you can all come. Next slide. We have the phase 3 of our climate education professional development went out about 60 days ago. And we awarded 13 programs, over $500,000 for programs throughout the state for the 2025-26 school year coming up right now. And the overall program includes that it would have an impact on, has had an impact on 1,000 teachers so far, 100 plus schools, and engaged with over 40 community partners. So really impactful climate education grants. These grants can range from anywhere around $25,000 for a school or a group of teachers, or up to $100,000 for schools that unite with other schools for larger consortiums or symposiums. And the next slide. We also are making a case to many of you are familiar that there is a Maine School Construction Commission as put out in an executive order by the governor, and that commission has been taking our request seriously that we build schools that are funded by the state, less control, of course, over the ones that are funded locally, but those that are funded by the state to have the highest possible practical environmental standards. Putting in an oil burner that will last 30 years can be up to 29,000 tons of carbon that will go out into the world as a result of our schools. So we are trying to move away from that as part of our lead by example, the executive order that the governor put out in 2018. And it is consistent, as you know, with the Maine Won't Wait updated goals for all Maine public school buildings that came out late last year, December 2024. And those are the 3 major things. I do want to mention specifically, because Sarah had mentioned it, that the passage of the new Green Schools Network bill is very exciting to us. It passed. As in sometimes these legislators do this, I can say that being a former one, that we pass things but don't fund it. So we're finding some ways in which we can creatively find some philanthropy, perhaps some ways to work with MOCA in their, that MOCA might be willing to support some of these. This will work within the Maine Green Schools with some of their work around communications, around climate change, to municipalities and working through municipalities. So we're looking for creative ways to branch that out, but it has a huge amount of potential for us to create really strong, vibrant, and established networks for educators to get support, school leaders to get support, facility managers to get support. So we're really excited about that. So that is, those are only 3 of the seemingly 50 things that we're doing, but it's exciting time for us, and really, really happy to be contributing to this, and we'll really excited and hope to see, as I say, many of you on November 7th for the symposium. So I think that's about it. And that's my email, that's my number. If you want to give me a call or reach out, feel free to do so. I look forward to it. I think that's it, sir.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn and Paige. I'm really looking forward to hearing how the symposium goes, and we'll make sure that all of you have the details about that in case you're interested in attending. You will all remember that that work is part of Strategy G in Maine Won't Wait, which focuses on ensuring that climate action reaches all Maine people. And on that note, I wanted to turn things over to Hillary to talk a little bit more about the work we're doing on our communication strategy. Hillary?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. So the Climate Council has always recognized how vital it is to engage people across the state on climate action and to provide clear, reliable information. We've had the STS subcommittee provide 4-year scientific assessment of climate change and its effects on Maine, also providing interim updates. We reached out to over 1,000 people during the last creation of Maine Won't Wait in 2024. And we know in these implementation years, it's particularly important that we continue to be communicating well with the public in a way that helps take the plan forward and also helps Mainers take action in their communities. So our climate outreach and communication coordinator, Abigail Hain, has been leading an effort right now to develop a new communication strategy. And we wanted to make sure to ask for your input through a short Mentimeter activity. So I'm going to ask if Megan, you can pull the activity up. And for all of you, at the top of your inbox should be the log information that you need for the Mentimeter activity. It includes the website and an 8-digit code that you'll want to either type into your phone or type into your computer. And so what I want to ask is that you take a moment to reflect on the presentations and the conversations that we just had during the course of this meeting. We've covered a lot of ground. And I know for many people in the public, it's hard to follow federal policy shifts and what their effects are. It's also really important that we continue to tell the story of how Maine is continuing to lead during this moment of change. So based on these conversations, could you please type in what you think your top messages would be for the Maine public about what we're doing with climate right now? So you should have the opportunity to type in about, I think, 2 to 3 messages. And then if you like what someone else has written, you also have the opportunity to vote it up so we can kind of see where there might be some traction. I'll give everyone a few moments to do this. Okay, so some of the initial ones coming in, Maine is staying the course. We're continuing to lead. We're not giving up on preparing Maine for the impacts of climate change. Maine is continuing to lead. So a lot on what we're still doing to kind of be leading on climate action. There's still opportunities for progress. We're still making progress. Let's see. We're finding creative ways to prioritize resilience, staying positive about what's possible. Also seeing a lot about how climate action and climate work is really practical, that it helps support economic growth, cost effective. Also seeing a lot about local action, coalition and community building through this work as a really important theme to also be pulling out. Okay, we'll give it a couple more moments for any other ones that might come in. Takes a village to be doing the work. Again, more on innovation. And then, yeah, Megan, if you can scroll back up to the top and see if there are any others. Okay. Great. All right. So we'll be sure to share this around afterwards. Feel free to continue adding more messages here, and we'll use this to update the strategy and what we're thinking about as the key messages moving forward. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Melanie.
Hillary was awesome. I know that was a lot in the last 2 hours. I wasn't quite sure how this was going to play out, frankly, as we put this agenda together, but that was an awful lot of information that we just went through about all of what's been happening in Maine since the legislative session started. Despite all the changes at the federal level, that was an awful lot for us to absorb. So thanks for sitting through that. And also thanks, Hillary, for giving us an opportunity to have a bit of a interactive session at the end there. So we know that the federal landscape is going to continue to evolve through the Climate Council and other forums. It's important that we all stay informed. We're going to need to be thinking strategically about how to be flexible, as I mentioned earlier. We're dealing with a landscape that we have to think about how we're going to incorporate that into the way that we plan for what we do as a state. And obviously, based on the conversations we've already had this morning, we're already successfully doing that, right? Like, this is great evidence of the way that we can move forward as a state, and we need to continue to do that. Our working groups and subcommittees are going to be continuing to meet throughout the fall. We'll be discussing policy updates, developments in technology, as well as tracking our progress implementing the targets that are in the climate plan. We're working on drafting the annual report. So every year, the Climate Council needs to put together a progress report. So that is in the works right now. So when we meet next time in December, we'll be going over our progress report. I think that we're seeing already there's a lot to celebrate, and this report is going to highlight the many initiatives that are happening both at the state and federal levels. And then thinking about going into 2026, we're going to be focusing on driving implementation forward and strategizing on how best to accelerate our successes and navigate whatever are the additional new challenges that are before us at that time. But I really appreciate all of the presenters today. The updates, this I think gives us a good sense of the, pun intended, the landscape that we have before us. So that we can all think about that as we continue to work together on implementing the goals of our plan. It's been a pleasure being able to go through this with you all and see what we are continuing to do, even when we have a lot of challenges in front of us. This is a collaboration that, as we've discussed, has been award-winning in terms of planning. And I think we've got a lot of opportunity in front of us to continue to make great progress. So thank you all for taking the time with us this morning. And we'll look forward to seeing you in December. Details on December's meeting are coming together, so you'll be getting that information from Hillary. Again, thanks to Hillary for joining us as our new Climate Council coordinator. We're glad to have her on the team. So you'll be seeing more from her in your inboxes to come. And I'll check with Sarah if you have anything else you want to add before we wrap it up.
Thanks, Melanie. No, just thank you so much again to all of our presenters. And just really great to see you all this morning. Looking forward to seeing you on December 1st.
Thank you, everybody.